What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a video about mods. Technically revisiting a subject for a video I did several years ago, as I review a lot of games, and this includes games where modding is very popular. And while that video was decent at giving my general opinion on them, now that my channel has grown pretty exponentially since then, I think it's about time to update this, as I've been getting a lot of questions about mods lately, and a nice video to point people to about a specific subject is always helpful for me. So here we are discussing this. Now, at the very beginning of the video, I want to stress that overall my opinion of mods is simply that they are great. I'm glad people have them as an option to customize their gameplay experience. If you've watched for long, you might notice that I really enjoy modular systems for difficulty, and I think of mods in much the same way. I'm glad they exist for people to customize what they want out of a game that they have paid for. And while that's my overall opinion, it gets much more nuanced than that when you are both reviewing games and discussing them on a daily basis. So right away, people may be familiar with the fact that I play with the minimal amount of mods. Essentially as few as I can get away with, and in most cases simply none. Realistically, the only time I use mods in my video much at all is when they are just flat out required to get a game to run in an acceptable state on modern hardware. Off the top of my head, this is something I had to do with Temple of Elemental Evil, as that game doesn't really run without mods, and you need two of them, Temple Plus and Circle of 8, to have a decent experience that isn't likely to corrupt your save file while you're at it. Another one is Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, which was largely fixed from its many problems at launch by an unofficial patch that has gone to great lengths to keep it updated over the years. And as such, it's basically become the way to play Vampire the Masquerade. So what's that about? Why do I approach mods that way? Well, simply put, I am trying to evaluate a game for what it is, and not for what that experience looks like, via mods that aren't technically something you get with your purchase. Now, that's not to say they aren't noteworthy at times, like for instance, there are many games where when you're covering them, I think it is worthwhile to mention that mods exist for many of, say, the problems you might run into, which is something I often do for games like Bethesda's titles, who have probably taken the most pro-mod stance out there, and you'll have heard me do exactly that in my reviews for things like Oblivion or Morrowind. And it will absolutely happen for Skyrim as well, because if I were to cover Skyrim and not mention mods, that would be an egregious oversight on my part, because they're so fundamental to what that game is about, even if you're not using them for yourself. But even in cases like that, where they're relevant, I try to keep their use to an absolute minimum so I can evaluate the thing people are actually paying for. And yes, we'll touch on paid mods here in a moment, which is my very general approach to things, and basically where that original video ended. But now that the channel's got a little bit bigger, and time marches ever onwards, there's a few more things to talk about. So right away, probably the question I get the most is people asking me to review extremely large, expansion-sized mods or complete overhaul mods, things like the upcoming Skyblivion. People have asked me about Fallout London, Chronicles of Murtana, Enderal, just to name a couple of them. And I totally understand why people ask me to do this, and my general response is always, I might make a video on it, but I will never review these. So why is that? A lot of people have poured their love into this thing and it clearly deserves the coverage, so why wouldn't I review it? Well, simply put, these mods are pretty much always free. And traditionally, with reviews for things like the video games that I cover, you are paying for that thing potentially, which is why you're looking up a review to see about the quality of it before you make that purchase. The same cannot be said for these larger expansion mods because they're free. A lot of people have dedicated their time and sweat and effort into a project that isn't actually charging you anything. And given that that is being done in the face of the fact that mods are, at best, always on pretty legally shaky ground, makes it pretty noteworthy. And for me to come in behind that and critique a passion project by people who are not even, in most cases, full-time game developers, who aren't charging you for anything, just comes across to me as especially mean-spirited. And I'm simply not comfortable with doing that, outside of a very specific context of them deliberately asking me for my feedback. And even then, I don't know that I'd make a video about it. Though I might make a video about these mods generally, just because sometimes it's cool to help people push out their passion project to others who can check it out for themselves, just to use the platform to sort of spread the word a bit. And I'm fine with that generally, but I would never call those a review simply because I'm not comfortable critiquing the very nature of the work they're doing, frankly. Now, somewhere in that spiel, you might have been asking yourself, well, Mortem, what about paid mods? Because those are a thing sometimes. And my response to that is a little bit more nuanced, but generally, yes, if a mod is asking you to pay for it, I think it definitely deserves to be reviewed, even if that means acknowledging that it's not very good or introduces instability to the system. And what I mean by that is that mods, when they are free, get away with a lot of things that professional game devs simply cannot, which is extreme amounts of bugs and problems. Because while people often credit modders for fixing things that the developers themselves did not for whatever reason, in my experience, the situation there is a little more complicated than that statement would have you believe, because professional game developers that are charging you for a product are held to a different standard in terms of QA, that is to say quality assurance, and making sure that the game is stable and able to be enjoyed, than someone who is doing it for free. Now, and many times, professional game dev absolutely drops the ball there, and I rake them over the coals for that in pretty much every review I do, and it's one of my common complaints. And something that often gets overlooked in the discussion about regular mods fixing these things is that oftentimes they make that game much more unstable as a result. Which is why things like having to load mods in specific orders or come up with these elaborate mod lists that just so happen to be stable have so much work put into that specific context, which people don't mind so much because technically it's free, outside of course, the time spent setting it up. All of that to tell you that, yes, when mods start charging you for things, they are exposing themselves to being open to an entirely different level of scrutiny, specifically about things like how well that mod runs, what content it introduces, etc. So yes, I would theoretically be fine with a review for a paid mod. The other side of that, though, is that typically speaking, paid mods are relatively small, and generally not worthy of taking the time to evaluate on that level, short of anything in aggregate like you sometimes see with sort of mod overviews that I've seen people do on like a weekly basis type stuff, and you don't really see paid mods being done for these huge overhaul expansions, and I imagine that's for legal reasons in a lot of cases, as the risk of putting all that time and effort into something you're going to charge for only for the game dev to do what they have the right to do, which is to say actually that's copyright infringement, and push back against it could be an issue for you, because once you start selling things commercially, that's a very different situation than giving it away for free. And it opens you up to problems, frankly. But theoretically, yes, if any large expansion level mod did in fact charge people, I would definitely review that without thinking much about it. So to sort of sum this video up, while mods can certainly be an incredible game-changing, quite literally, experience for any game you might be playing, when it comes to reviewing them, or reviewing games with them installed even, I personally at least find it to be a much more nuanced situation than people might initially think, because regular game releases, compared to mods, etc., are just held to a very different standard based on the money they are asking you for, the time invested versus the reward expected, etc., which I've went over in this video here. So it's something that I try to be extremely mindful of when I'm discussing any of these things, and I hope this video at least answered some questions. But if you have anything more specific you'd like to ask, by all means drop it in the comment section below, or simply let me know how you feel about all this down there as well, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.